Good morning to everyone around the world, for everywhere you're dialing in, and good morning to my colleagues in the East Coast. Good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the panel discussion of glocalization of the global content supply chain. We've all been in using content as a side character, as a supporting actor in our commercialization process, but content has really been starting to take center stage as a main character as we're trying to, as an industry, trying to hyper-personalize and creating a better customer experience. And that requires a different level of volume, velocity, and variety of content that in many organizations we find will not be able to achieve if we approach the content supply chain market by market. But it's very challenging to create really creative, transform your creative process, production, approval, publishing, and in a global fashion and still meet the local needs. So we found with our experts that the solution lies in creating a model that balances between the global scale and the needs of the local market and bringing automation into the process to truly allow for scale. I have the pleasure with really one of the most distinguished panels I've worked with before to discuss these topics. And I want to start off by introducing this panel with Libby Driscoll, who's VP of Global Commercial Services at Eli Lilly. Hi, Libby. Dr. Michael Kerr. Hi. Dr. Michael Kerr is the Global Head of Go-to-Market Services of Boehringer Ingelheim. Thomas Thestrup-Turp, Corporate VP, Digital Strategy and Solutions, Novo Nordisk. Margot O'Neill, Head of Customer Experience and Content Strategy at GSK. And Saket Malhotra, Head of Commercial Information Management and Enablement at Ipsen. Thank you, everybody, and really very excited to have you on the panel with us today. But let's jump right in because we have a lot of things to discuss. And I introduced Saket last, but I want to pose my first question to you. Is in your experience, what are successful approaches to build a strong foundation for an effective global to local supply chain, Saket?
Good morning, everyone. In my experience, establishing a clear content strategy for global to local supply chain needs and alignment with your business objectives and brand tactics. The content should be co-created across larger markets and affiliates with global centralized teams. As we establish the content supply chain, having an agile digital operating model is very important. Something like digital content factory or omni-channel service center. And as you're defining the operating model, you should consider some of the proven or successful methods as part of defining your strategy, including co-creation of content across larger markets, focus on creating digital or content capabilities like modularization of content, content libraries, your image libraries, align with your brand themes from global, regional, and local standpoint. Also consider the feedback of localized content back to global content libraries. It should be bi-directional. It should be close collaboration across different teams from global, regional, and local affiliate standpoint. And then we should strike the right balance between centralization and decentralization of content creation aligned with your digital omni-channel execution. My experience working with big pharma and mid-size, that it's very important for you to have your content strategy aligned with your overall omni-channel or digital strategy to deliver the business impact along with your brand tactics.
Great. Thank you, Saket. Before I ask the next question, I want to let the audience know that we have a poll up and running in the background. I see some answers coming in already. So the question is if you feel that your content in your organization, that you have enough content to achieve hyper-personalization. So please, while we continue this, answer this poll and then we bring it into the discussion. Thank you. And thanks, Saket. Saket, you spoke about the right balance between global and local, which leads me to a question for Margot. And obviously, it's not reasonable to have all content globalized or done centrally. But how in your experience, do you strike the balance between? How do you approach getting to that balance of what should be local and what should be done by global centrally?
It's a great question. And for GSK, it's all about finding the right balance and constantly reevaluating the model. For us, we're trying to make things as simple for the local marketers as possible, not create barriers and not slow them down. One tactic that's been quite helpful for us is really doubling down on modular content. How do we create global content in a modular form that allows the markets to really assemble the right experience that they're trying to accomplish for their customers? So we're constantly also looking at new services that we can add, potentially, a creative studio that allows for us to make iterations on content so that we can make sure that it's fit for purpose for the markets. We're also looking at what's honestly a local to local strategy. So where we do need to create local content, um, such as if there's a disease awareness campaign that is not supported globally, or if there's new local scientific data that needs medical writing. In those instances where local content is created, is there a way to actually reuse that content for other local markets? So again, for us, it's all about finding that right balance, trying to allow for personalization both for the HCP experience, but also for the market to drive the experience that they're looking for, and making sure that we're providing as much global support as we can while still enabling the markets to drive forward the strategy that's going to be best for them.
Great. By the way, again, I want to invite the panel also to comment on each other. If you have any thoughts around the balance aspect, or maybe some example or experience on how you try to strike a balance and it worked or didn't work, please feel free to add to that before I jump to the next question.
So, Mark, if I add to that, in my experience, it's very important to have the right balance, and the way you can achieve that is by understanding your markets, customer journeys needs, because the customer needs will be very different across different regions, looking into the local regulations, the compliance, the cultural preferences will be very critical as you're co-creating the content, thinking from global and regional or local standpoint will be very important. Going with like 80-20 rule may work for you based on where you are as part of the journey. Over time, you will build the maturity, but my uh, experience or my recommendation is to do a pilot, prove the model, rather than applying the same principle across different therapeutic areas or markets, because the approach you're going to take for markets like oncology will be very different from your there, because of the maturity, because of the experience you're looking as part of your customer and patient centricity.
Thank you, Saket. Libby, you wanted to say something too.
No, I loved what Margot was saying, this idea. A lot of times we think about global to local and driving reuse there. But I loved what she was saying about local to local, that markets beyond global can use each other. But even within a market, are you driving reuse of the content that you're creating across? We're all working on creating that omni-channel experience for our customers. And so if you take the time and effort to develop that initial content and claims and modules, are you just getting use out of it? Or are you able to reuse that across all your different channels within your market, across markets, feeding it back up to global? And so it creates this nice little spider web that's well connected, but gets the best content used across the ecosystem.
I really like this idea of a non-linear content supply chain, but that really requires us to approach it very differently than we have in the past. And tight alignment really between global, local, and the markets, between the markets themselves. Thomas, in your experience, how do you manage that alignment between these different parties?
Before I answer that more high level question, I'd like to jump into a very, very practical example, which I think is important in this context, because we've been talking about this. I think it's also to Timo's opening speeches about getting practical now. So I just returned from the EASD today in Sweden, and they're and very proud to say Novo Nordisk is really addressing that channel, which is congresses that we all invest in a lot, to create a platform for I would actually call it glocalization. We create, the global team provides, of course, a lot of great science, but also a facilitation and an engagement platform physically and virtually. And it's all about, as I've said many times, stretching that content dollar. We all invest a lot in this. Seeing that done in 3 days is just not good enough anymore. And by the way, the physical numbers attending congresses is declining, but the virtual numbers are increasing. That's good. So we are in a hybrid world, but it's about getting that content localized and up to as many interested as possible. So we have now set up a practical studio and content creation opportunity for affiliates, so they figure out what their content strategies for Italy, for example, and pull together the necessary parties, be that doctors or local employees, and create the content there and then, having it MLR approved. So being really agile about the production, and then they have the back end producing it, the email, the journeys, the emails, the video content, etc. Bam. That is stellar.
Very
And
cool.
that's only possible because we have an operational engine that we built now, going from a fully in person to a virtual to now hybrid world, and having that engine room set up. That works. And I'm very happy to see our scientific content reaches many, many more target audiences. It stays there longer. It creates a journey. And of course, we get better data collection. Right? And it's local. So of course, what is needed is pull through. It's not enough any longer, dear marketeer, to fly your doctors to the Congress and have a great time. That is also very important. But you need to plan for that. You need to plan for your engagement and stretch it and do the pull through back home. And we're getting there. So a very practical example, but this wasn't
great
possible
example.
years ago.
A great example. Thank you.
I would like to add one element here also, if I may, Thomas and Mark, because I also like this maximizing the content dollar idea, and not only talking about local, regional, local. Yeah, the local to local is also very important, and we are embarking in BI now on a journey that we maximize the utilization of our digital asset management system, because this can be much more than a simple archive for digital assets, right? You can beef it up with some social elements. You can, of course, have your thumbs up buttons, and then you can post also regular reports on what has been the most used assets, what have been the most impactful assets, so that you can start sharing in a much more focused way and drive reusage much more. And we are just starting to create much more transparency around what is available in this beautiful digital asset management system.
And then Mark, getting back to your question and actually tapping into what Zach had said. So yes, it's absolutely important. It needs to be part of the strategy. And when we started way back, content, we basically called out content that it will multiply, right? And we need to fix that barrier before we can have any aspirations to achieve in a multi-channel, omni-channel strategy. We need to tackle the content barrier. And the first step was transparency. So simply making it visible to senior uppers on how much we actually produce. And then everybody was falling down the chair, right? And again, a strong content management system and that creates that transparency truly from end to end, and then slicing and dicing it on brands. And the obvious question starts to pop up: do we really need that much? Well, if you need it from multiple channels, maybe you do, but maybe there's no need to recreate it from scratch all the time, right? So transparency was the first, and then what is effective? What does that mean? And then the topic often comes on cost or time to market or quality. And these are the foundational things. You need to get that in order before anybody's interested in talking to the next level, which I find way more interesting, namely the insight about the assets. So we can, when we have the transparency, when we have our foundational capabilities in place to track and trace and monitor, then hopefully we can get to the much more interesting discussion about what works. And how do we further modularize to make it even more effective, and then also recommend to marketeers. So not having that, let's create a new campaign approach, but okay, what works? What can we learn from? What can we tweak? Et cetera, et cetera. And that is the part we are on now. It is not without bumps. And I think what seems to constantly surprise us all is the level of detail and discipline we need to put into this if you want that holy grail, right? it's a whole level, different level of effort than we're used to.
Very cool.
And I think
Thank
that's
you,
a great point, Thomas. As you're defining the content, you cannot just think of content in silos without aligning that with your overall omni-channel tactics. But one thing really helped us in my previous companies and in my current companies, defining a very clear KPIs to measure the impact of your content, your channel to your business objectives or your brand tactics. Thinking not just from the content, but what are the systems to use, how we can partner with global or regional IT teams as part of having the right foundation in place to deliver these. But having that operating model or service center or competency center behind to have the right talent is also critical, because a lot of times we create content because of lack of understanding of the market, local market, or the compliance regulations. So it's very important for you to have all of these criteria well defined as part of your execution tactics. So great point.
Thank you, Saket. Before I pose a question to Michael, let's pull quickly the poll in that I asked the audience about if they feel that they have enough content. And as you can see on the screen, there's a significant portion that feels that they have too much, but there's even a larger portion of the audience that responded here that said they needed quite a bit more. A few ones feel they're not even close to it. I would love to cut this down by brand marketers versus global operations folks that are in our audience. But again, this is a qualitative tool. But I think we can agree that variety and volume should probably increase. And you see this across the markets. Thanks everyone for answering the poll. We're going to have more down the road. I'm going to pull this up in a moment, but I'm going to ask Michael first a question. As we want to increase volume, what approaches are you taking to really scale volume, velocity, and variety at Boehringer Ingelheim?
That's a good question, Mark. Thank you for raising this. So what we did in BI over the last 2.5 to 3 years, we have really built a global digital production factory, which is supporting our most important digital channels. Looking today where we have really reached full global scale now with a model that is separating the creative work from the production work. And we are delivering the production work through a highly cost-efficient model, almost exclusively coming from offshore India. And something I'm proud of is we are literally supporting each and every market now that BI is operating. But I think what is even more important than just running such a cost-efficient model and to save the money is that this digital factory indeed is now providing the technical, but also the organizational infrastructure that is really needed to pilot and to scale any upcoming new content model that might come our way. And this, of course, includes the current hype around modular content and content automation, of course. And I use hype not in a negative way here. I really believe this is a very, very viable way forward. So now we have really put our operations on a path towards increased automation of managing, authoring, and also improving content. We are converting our content into machine-readable data at a component level. These components are getting organized into modules, and ultimately these modules are tied together or exclude one another by business rules. And very important here is that these business rules are machine readable, actually. Otherwise, there will be no scalability in the end. And ultimately, all these elements feed into what we, at least in BI, call our content toolbox, which is for now at least a semi-automated approach that creates differentiated assets customized towards different audiences. And let me be clear, potentially going down to a segment of one in future. Let me try to summarize this a little bit because it's important. Such a content toolbox consists of channel agnostic content, channel agnostic components, and channel agnostic modules. And there are channel specific templates and the before mentioned business rules that need to be machine readable so that these templates can be populated. And the missing link here is then this content authoring system that can now stitch everything together into a fully assembled asset that are then ready for deployment. And we are running a couple of pilots currently, and the outcomes are already pretty promising. In some instances, we have seen up to 120% of increased open rates for emails in this case, and up to 25% increased click-through rates. So with these initial winnings, everybody's very energized to continue on this journey because it seems to be an element that is making a difference in future.
That's fantastic. By the way, I want to compliment the panel here on how you're setting the tone for this conference. We're not talking about aspiration or thinking, but you're actually sharing what we're doing. And that's exactly what Timo spoke about. So I'm very privileged to have a group like this here. Very cool. And Michael, while you spoke, there was an audience question coming in around modular content, the journey approach, lessons learned. You already talked about the critical element to have a focus on automation. I want to pose the question to Libby first, but then also ask you to comment on that because it's right along the lines of what you just said. Like, how do you approach modular content and automation are really linked intricately? I think that's what we heard in the comments today. But Libby, what are you doing on your side to drive automation? Then I invite Michael back to comment further on this audience question.
Yeah. No, I think, Michael, you actually described it really well, right? How we're trying to develop modular content and machine readable and use templates. And so I think that was a great explanation. I would just push us back one step before that, right? Is there's got to be a mindset shift with our marketers, because in our global to local models, we've been co-creating together and we've been thinking about campaigns and tactics. And so you've got to take that energy and that collaboration and how you used to work together and say, we're going to move that towards claims and modules. And then when you have those kind of building blocks, or you could say ingredients for a meal, you can combine them in all different ways to make different meals for dinner and not be eating the same thing all the time. And then you start adding automation to that, which requires that you take those modules and combine it with templates. And again, this is another mind shift that has to take place, because marketers liked, changing colors and picking a different word and having some bubbles go across the screen. And you've got to get them thinking that the value of the content is not often in that creative, but actually in the meaningful information that you're trying to convey to your customers. And actually, when you can use modules and you can use templates together, that's when you can get to automation. And not only do you see open rates, but you can get higher open rates, but you can get to a much more personalized experience. So the time that it would take for you to create one email, with the touch of a button, you can create 56 different versions of that email, and then start to do A/B testing to see which customers are opening which emails, and then that helps you optimize your content and figure out how many variations do you really need of a tactic. You probably don't need 50 variations of every single tactic. And so that was interesting. Hey, do we have enough content? We probably don't have enough content in some areas. Channels like email, we probably need more variations. Something like a peer-to-peer deck or a detail aid, we probably don't need 50 variations of that content. And so that goes back, I think, to the balance, is how do you strike the right balance between personalization and where you really need it.
Oh, thank you, Libby. Thomas, did you want to add a comment?
Because I think to Libby's point, I mean, sometimes that it is not, how fancy the bubbles are across the screen to be a little provocative, but it's the speed, right? It's the speed. So if you can get content out from a Congress to the ones that are not participating, or get that, company spin on it from a KOL that they know, it's about being first. It's not valuable 3 weeks later, regardless of how fancy the bubbles are. So that we simply just need to change the paradigm on that one.
Yeah, very good. I agree, and I love the bubble example. I always talk about birch tree versus pine tree and how that makes a difference. But we're not trying to ridicule the creative aspect of content creation. That is important, right? But when you have to prioritize, I think that's what you're all saying. You might want to sacrifice tiny little things on perfection, which the agencies are very often focused on, versus speed and content, substance of the content. And I think, and you can all agree to that. Michael, I thought I would circle back to you because the question has been, what does this module journey look like? What is critical? And how long does it take to really get something up and running, at least at a substantial pilot level? Can you talk a little bit about that, and also kind of what tools you've been using and you found essential in order to really get some automation in your content supply chain?
So first of all, let me also elaborate a little bit on this creating transparency first, and before doing the next fancy thing in terms of new content creation, let's maximize what we have at our fingertips. Yeah, and there's a lot that we can do on top, and Libby related to this already. And also Thomas talked about transparency, and I would like to add one more very practical element to also this asset management system that you can use much more. We have also introduced a KPI that is called localization usage. Yeah, and with every KPI, it is very important that you are clear what you are talking about, but you need to start somewhere. Yeah, and the approach in BI is that there are corporate core content modules that BI expects all geographies, all countries to localize. Yeah, and this would already make a big difference in comparison to our former approaches, where we were actually running a pretty decentralized model here. And then you have full transparency. So with this digital factory that I was talking about, you can even create the transparency that is required to really track down your content journey from corporate to the regions into the markets, because we are producing this content, we are producing the localized versions of this content, so we can track it down. And one very important element here that I would like to elaborate a little bit on is that you have a proper tagging in place. And around tagging, I probably can close the loop to your question, Mark. I have not forgotten it. So to have a consistent holistic tagging framework in place is very important, because without having this proper layer of metadata that is traveling with your content, with your assets, you might be able to localize and customize and all the rest of it, but you will have no idea what is happening with it in the markets. Yeah, you don't know what is effective, what is not effective. So you need to have this tagging piece in place. And at least to my experience in BI, this is a little bit underestimated, the importance of it, and it's a little understood. Is this an English term? No, I don't think you are. There's a lack of understanding how important it is. I believe this is what I wanted to say. And talking about the tools and so on, I mentioned already the authoring tool, the content authoring tool. It comes along with an AI machine learning element that is able to break down either new assets or existing assets into single elements that are automatically tagged. Is it perfect? No, probably not, but it's an amazing start to get scalability in place also in these pieces. So it's not beyond pilot phase, but we started to understand how this can work.
Yeah, and I'd love to jump in here as well from a GSK perspective, because Michael, I want to double down. The visual authoring tool has been a game changer for us, because we took a very kind of manual approach of kind of testing out modular content, and how we kind of bring all the different modules and content channel frames together. But the visual authoring tool, that gets you the message tracking, that gets you a seamless experience for the marketer. It makes it so it's not a cumbersome experience to work with all of these different modules. So that is a huge step. And I think having the underlying technology to support it is critical. And frankly, what's so powerful about modular content is that it gives you the content effectiveness, and you can see it at a level far deeper than we've been able to get from a master content perspective. I think the one watch out that I'll share for anyone that's kind of looking at the modular content journey is just not everything has to be modular, and to really make sure that you think through kind of the master versus modular strategy, because it's very easy to get caught up in, I'm going to create modular content for every persona, every stage of the customer journey, rather than thinking about, when do I need to use master content? When do I need to use modular content? And what experience are we trying to drive where modular content can really play a huge role? So really want to echo your comments, Michael, because I think the visual authoring tool has been quite powerful for us as well.
Awesome. Yeah, and I really like how you're highlighting that the underlying capabilities that feed into that tool are absolutely critical to really get scale there. So that's a great point.
And
By the way, I'm
my,
weaving some audience. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
one feedback on authoring tools. So I completely agree with Michael and Margaret on that. But my experience is, like, as you're thinking of your overall omni strategy or content strategy, you can centralize the technologies. You can bring the maturity by building some frameworks, your component libraries for different brand deals. So some of these can be centralized, can be managed from the global standpoint, but how you roll out these capabilities are critical to give the flexibility to the local marketers, or as you are modularizing the content, how we can build that flexibility to support the brand priorities and tactics within the local market.
Thank you,
Let me
Sarkis.
And I'm
build on
seeing
this
that
also.
in big pharma, mid-sized pharma, where we were struggling how to bring global and local together, and then we agreed that let's align on the guiding principles. Let's understand what tools and technologies we need to support and but be agile. And then we build the frameworks thinking from our mature markets versus our small market to have that agility as part of our execution.
Michael.
I would like to add one point here, Saket. Thank you for that. What we are doing in BI, I mentioned the corporate core content already, which is capturing kind of the core claims that we want to have out there. So they are very key to have them consistently in the market. The way we are thinking about this, again, coming back to this global digital factory that is actually reaching each and every market in the meantime, over the course of the last 2.5 years, we have built a significant knowledge base of what localization means. And guess what? There are patterns that are always similar, if not the same. Yeah. And talking about 80-20, I think we can prepare 80% of what is needed in markets, get it ready in this content toolbox, and let the markets play around with the remaining 20%. And that would significantly speed up also the time to market.
Which, by the way, one good news, if you bring the poll up really quick before we jump into the next question. If I'd asked this question a few years ago, how good global content is, I would meant velocity, that there's a great appreciation of what global is delivering to the markets. When I was a marketer in global 10 years ago, or maybe it's even longer now, we had to like really force feed it to the markets. So I was really glad to see that this has shifted. Fantastic.
Good
But,
news, there's learning in corporate also, huh? Great.
Good point. If you go back to the panel, thank you. Thomas, I want to ask you, and maybe Libby, you can chime in there too. And again, I'm weaving some audience questions in here, but what is the role of regulatory, right? Because ultimately all this stuff we do well in producing and making it meaningful, it has to be approved. How do you keep up with that pressure with the regulatory pressures or needs while trying to accelerate, Thomas?
Yeah, well, there's multiple ways. A short answer would be modular, aka standardization. It's difficult though. Again, local regulation does need to happen, but standardization and then an agile team working on the content with the different parties, regulatory, medical, and commercial, closely interlinked is another key facet. And again, an agile mindset within the local teams to get it through fast. So it's a combination of several things. So it's again foundational processes and platforms needs to be in place, and then also the process among the people that needs to be involved, and the mindset to that. So one doesn't go without the other. But of course, not having the infrastructure and the process in place makes it very difficult for the people who actually want to. So they both need to be there. And then back to modular or standardized, it just makes things easier. Instead of having to review everything from scratch. Again, different companies have different procedures. We in Novo Nordisk did away, of course, but did it differently, and basically agreed that we would hold ourselves accountable for certain different levels. So of course, if you have a launch brand and new science, etc., you go all in. But if you're talking about a late stage brand, it's been many years in the market. Maybe we can allow marketeers to take on a little bit greater risk at some things, and not having to review everything from end to end. So having a different funnel of our asset types in our MLR review procedures, of course in collaboration with regulatory and QA. So that was a long answer to a simple question.
There's never an easy answer to regulatory approval.
No,
Livy, you have also some experience.
No, great comments, Thomas. I guess what I would add to that is really understanding the regulatory differences and the labels around the world, because there's probably more similarities. There's a lot of countries who follow the US label or the European label, or maybe a hybrid of those two. And then you've got China and Japan. And so really understanding those differences as well as similarities, because then hopefully you can reuse a lot of your content. And I think the other thing is making sure that we're involving regulatory very early. They're super knowledgeable people who love to get into the details. And so if you include them early in the process, that sometimes avoids some of the challenges downstream.
Great. Yeah, and helps us to reevaluate the model. Saket, go ahead.
Yeah. So one thing I would add, things are changing as we talk about omni-channel, because the focus is shifting towards customer experience and patient experience. What I feel that there is some education to be done with our regulatory teams, how they used to manage or approve the content versus where we are, where speed to value is very important. The customer experience is becoming so critical as we create these content, as we understand the local regulations. So there is some learning awareness we should focus to bring them as part of our journeys. And that is where that close collaboration and partnerships are becoming critical for the success of these investments.
Thank you. Very good point. Actually, since you're bringing this different perspective, Margot, I want to shift a little bit the conversation. When we talk about the global to local supply chain, we always talk about the efficiency, the operations behind it. But what do you think? How do you plan that global to global market process effectively so that the content actually works?
It's a great question, because I think one of the critical things that we're trying to do is actually building kind of on what Saket said, which is how do we shift the mindset to really be about the customer experience in this new world of omnichannel? It has to be centered around the customer experience. And so how are we experience planning at the start to identify what is needed? How do we prioritize what personas, what customer journeys, what experiences we're trying to create to then create the content to support that? That's a shift. That's a huge mindset shift. And so we're really trying to double down on that and figure out how to make that transition so that we are truly putting the customer at the center of the experience that we're trying to drive, rather than kind of forcing a brand experience down onto a population. So it's a slow transition, and that's where things like modular content and other pieces become really valuable, because it adds data, it adds an understanding of what's working and what's not working for that experience, so that we can be even more refined as we plan at the start with kind of the strategic approaches for the different brands.
Thank you. This is really good. And by the way, we're getting a ton of questions. I'll try to weave them together, and I weave them into the conversation. So I never had this official break between a conversation and Q&A. So makes most effective time. So what two questions I want to combine there is, again, modular and omni create a lot of, there's a lot of interest there. Here's a question around, how do the markets react to it? And how are they reacting in terms of shifting the role of their agency as they start to work in new ways, such as modular? Anyone have a comment around that?
Well, I can speak for BI maybe. So what we see is markets are all over this. They are fully on board because they all feel that more custom content is key and we need more of that. So whatever is helping them, they are fully coming on board. What we are also trying to achieve now in the next step, jumping on what Margaret was saying, coming from the customer journey, the customer experience that we want to create, that we come up really with a omni-channel content strategy framework that we then can walk through step by step how we execute on this. Because I'm sure we are not the only ones. We are struggling with connecting all the data that is required to talk to each other across channels, and make a meaningful, responsive omni-channel campaign out of this that has an impact that can be measured and the learnings can be fed back. So this is still a little premature, but this is our thought process. And again, markets are all in for that.
If you deliver something that helps them, Thomas, go ahead.
So,
Thomas,
I really hope there's a lot of Novo Nordisk colleagues listening in here, because it doesn't help it if it's coming from me, but from people like you, Michael, or others, that it becomes very clear that this is a new way of doing things. Because it's not without bumps on the road. I'm not going to sit here and say it is, but there's buy-in to the strategy. We know we need to do this, but it's not easy to let go of your ordinary practices with your agency whom you love. And when you're doing great, like we are in Novo Nordisk, maybe it's not exactly a budget reason why you're doing this, right? So it would help if it was sometimes, but it's much more fun to do on an upside. Yet there is changed ways of working. And for the brand manager in a local affiliate, where we are not yet providing deep insights into how the content works in some country, they might have a more difficult time seeing what's in it for me. And it's always that WIIFM point we need to get to, right? So people get it on a strategic level. We also need to get it all the way out there. But if suddenly budget becomes a constraint and you need to produce way more content, that's an easy one.
And Mark, just to add to what Michael and Thomas said, our experience here at Ipsen, as we define our omni strategy, we communicate that to both internal and external stakeholders, including agencies, on our new operating model and why we are insourcing some of the capabilities, but giving flexibility to our marketers. But as they are creating the local content, we clearly define the frameworks, the component libraries, and we told them to operate within the guardrails so that we can measure the impact of these digital investments across different channels. So we were lacking that when we were not able to do the ROI optimization across different brand tactics or digital investments. So we said we are flexible to work with local agencies, but they have to follow the best practices, the frameworks we are building within Ipsen, aligned with our global digital content factory and competency center. So I think that really helped them to have the flexibility to bring the speed, but we can measure the impact of these agencies and the content they are creating for our brands.
Thank you, Saket, and thank you, team. We're at the end of our panel. There's so many more questions from the audience, and I'm going to make an unscripted pledge here. We are going to collect these questions, and I'm going to work with some or all of the panel to further explore this topic and get some information back out to you. So thank you all for dialing in. Thank you for the panel here, for this really very vivid and real discussion, setting the tone for our conference. And please, everybody, enjoy the rest of the conversations. Hopefully they're even better than us. and which is hard to imagine. Thank you again, and it's always been a pleasure to have these dialogues with you and hear your experience and keep driving the industry forward with your leading transformation efforts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mark, thanks everybody. It was a pleasure.